Welcome. Welcome, Rutgers Prep parents. So great to have you with us this evening. Quite a few people we see coming in. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We hope everyone is comfortable, maybe curled up with a warm blanket, maybe grabbing a cup of tea and joining us tonight. Even faculty. We know there might be some faculty out there. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And again, welcome. My name is Sherry Riggy, and I'm really excited to be a part of this program tonight. In our work in college counseling, we know a big part of high school is so exciting and yet such a challenging time too for students and families. And so teens are really trying to figure out like who they are and what they care about, what they're curious about. And we hope that they'll take risks and we hope that they push themselves outside their comfort zone because that's what growth is about. But while we talk about the importance of building resilience in our students in schools all across the country, it does mean that sometimes students are uncomfortable and a little bit frustrated, and sometimes they might fail. And that period between not knowing something and knowing something is about that space of learning and growth. And this can be at sometimes unsettling for students and even for parents as they watch because they want to know how they can support their children. At the same time, we know that there is this kind of vital time in a student's life of achievement. And achievement is an important part of high school and an important part of the college process and college and beyond. And so tonight we're going to explore where that balance lies and strategies to help parents help their children at any age throughout their educational experience. We want them to grow, we want them to learn, and we want them to achieve. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce the other members of the college counseling team who are here this evening. We have Miss Kraus. Hi, Miss Kraus. Miss Shade. Hey, how are you? And Miss Abrams is here, and also Laura Muriello, who is our guest speaker, who I'll be throwing this over to in a few minutes. But first, we want to just touch on sort of how this happens in terms of achievement and where that lies. In the book called Never Enough by Jennifer Wallace, she talks a lot about professionalized childhood. I'd like to read a quote from her book. She says, academics, athletics, and extracurricular activities have become increasingly competitive, adult-led, and high stakes. Kids are running a course marked out for them without enough rest or a chance to decide if it's even a race they want to run. So, how do we demonstrate to our students that they matter as people? Not because they received an A on a test, not because they were performing well in an athletic event, not because they mastered a piece on the piano, but just that they are enough in terms of who they are as human beings. How do we feed that fire of curiosity, of interest, rather than focus too much on achievement? And in many cases, we understand that that achievement piece is really important and how that flows into the college process. But we like to focus on the differences between toxic achievement and growth culture. But when we support our students in building curiosity and building values and figuring out their skills, in highlighting their character traits as people, also their connection to their community, what we're doing is we're kind of creating an open door for students to build that muscle of resilience. And so we're really going to try to focus a lot on that. I think evidence of the importance of curiosity, values, and connection comes from this study called the Gallup-Purdue Index, which focuses on alumni success after graduation. And really what it does, it explores the perceptions of those students throughout their college experience. It started in 2014 with about 30,000 alums of undergraduate universities and colleges all across the country, and now it's up to 100,000 graduates each year. The study really highlights the importance of quality of life and the quality of the experience over a highly selective college. and looking at that experience. And they call the big six, the items you see here on the screen, as the things that the alum pointed to as the successful pieces of their college experience, and also what they felt as alum helped them build their careers as well. Why do we share this? Well, the value of the college experience goes beyond academics alone. And I think the skills that our students need and are required of them to navigate college, in fact, even from lower school to middle school and middle school to high school and then to college and then beyond, it's real. And it's important that our students have these skills and understand how to make that transition. So, in our work, we know that parents are constantly looking for ways to support and guide their children. And it's vital to have the right tools to do that. So, lucky for us, I'm about to pass the program over to someone I deeply respect and trust, and that's Lauren Muriello. Lauren is a licensed psychotherapist and founder of the Wellbeing Therapy Center. For over 20 years of experience working with children and their families. As an educational and motivational speaker, Lauren has delivered impactful presentations to thousands of students, parents, and educators, earning praise for her relatable and engaging approach. Lauren received her bachelor's degree from Cornell University and her master's degree from Montclair State University, where she earned the Dean's Leadership Award. She specializes in equipping educators, parents, and youth with practical tools to navigate childhood, adolescence, build resilience, and foster emotional well-being. Lauren, thank you so much for being with us this evening. We really appreciate it.
Great to be here, and thank you for that fabulous opening. Parenting teens, and especially right now in this generation. And I'm just going to pull up my slides here for you guys, but give me one moment to share. Here we go. Okay, you can see that. Wonderful. Sorry, it's let me do that again because I see that it's giving me like sort of a funny background format there, right? That was kind of odd. Let's try it again. How's that? That's better now, right? You can see the slides. And can you still see the faces as well? Okay, great. So, parenting teens, especially in high achieving environments, it can feel like you're trying to keep a high performance car running in tip top shape, right? So that's how I'm thinking about that. It's, as parents, we want to really support and encourage our children's success, but we really have to make sure that they don't burn out and that they don't lose confidence, and that they don't have low self-worth. That's certainly not what we're going for. So, I'm going to give you a simple framework today, that we can use to think about how to best support our kids. And it's called Fuel to A plus. Okay. And so we're going to think about how we're fueling our kids. Fuel is what parents provide in all different forms. And A plus is what we're preparing kids to get for. But an A plus teen, in this case, it's not one who performs perfectly and has A pluses on their transcript. It's the teen who can manage their life when you're not there. So there's a big difference there. The A in this case stands for autonomy. Okay, and we're going to look at this acronym in a few minutes. I want to give you a little bit more background and information about how I think about parenting effectively. But what we're really working towards are teens who can handle their life, who can manage their stress, and who can make their own decisions with confidence, right? That's how we get our kids to success, the way that we can define it in this more holistic way. Now, I always love sharing a little bit some research and some interesting articles and theories. So first of all, really interesting research done by this group here. And what they found was that actually, compared to the rest of the world, our parenting style is a little bit weird. We're outliers. This Western European industrialized, rich and democratic societies, we're outliers in that a lot of our countries have highest rates of parent-child conflict and have really high rates of youth struggling with mental health. Okay. And so there's something going on here because all the parents that I've ever worked with are so well intended. Everyone wants the best for our kids, right? And so we're going to look at tonight a little bit about what might be going on and what we could do differently to get our kids to that A plus success, that autonomy success. And so you've probably heard a lot of different words to describe this parenting style: this helicopter, snowplow, lawnmower, bulldozer. I did a little interview myself about the bulldozer parent. Um, and that metaphor is really, such that you're thinking about this bulldozer, right, like on an open field in front of the child's path, just clearing out all the little pebbles and rocks and the big stones and everything in the way, so that when their kids go down the path, it's nice and smooth and easy. But what we know is that if we clear out all the challenges, that our kids miss out on vital opportunities to struggle and to overcome struggle and to develop the skills that they need to get through challenges, right? And so it's really important that we're thinking about that piece. Interesting graph here that mothers in particular, who are college educated, have been spending more and more time parenting their kids in the past 25, 30 years. Again, we're very well intended, but there's something happening here that's tipping the scale. So I want to play a brief video for you. And it actually features Jonathan Haidt. Now, Jonathan Haidt, many of you have probably heard speak in the past year about his very important book, The Anxious Generation. This video comes a little bit before that with his previous book called The Coddling of the American Mind, I believe it's called. And let's just hear a little bit about what he has to say about this style of overparenting. And just give me a thumbs up, team, that you can hear the audio.
Tahesha Way, New Jersey's Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of State.
We can hear the audio of the ad, so just give me a second.
And we will your privacy and right to vote. In Congress, she'll keep standing up to Trump.
Okay, guys. Sorry. Here we go.
American parenting really changed in the 1990s. When I'm talking about the book, I go around the country, I ask audiences, at what age were you let out? At what age could you go outside and play with your friends with no adults supervising? And I say, only people over 40. What's your answer? Call it out. And it's 5, 7, 8, 6, 5, 7. It's always 5 to 8. That's what we always did. Between 5 and 8, kids could go outside without an adult. They'd get in arguments, they would play games, they would make rules. They were independent. They got years and years of practicing independence. Then I say, just people under 25. What year were you let out? 12, 14, 13, 16. Nobody says 10 or younger. In the 1990s, as the crime rate was plummeting, as American life was getting safer and safer, Americans freaked out and thought that if they take their eyes off their children, the children will be abducted. Now, this goes back, the fear was stoked by cable TV in the 1980s. There were a few high-profile abductions. But it's not until the 1990s that we really start locking kids up and saying, you cannot be outside until you're 14 or 15. We took this essential period of childhood from about 8 to 12, when kids throughout history have practiced independence, have gotten into adventures, have made rafts and floated down the Mississippi River. We took that period and said, you don't get to practice independence until it's too late, until that period is over. Now, a couple years before you go to college, now you can go outside. Oh, okay, go off to college. And a lot of them are not ready. They're just not used to being independent. When they get to college, they need more help. They're asking adults for more help. Protect me from this. Punish him for saying that. Protect me from that book. There's a very sharp change.
Okay. And so, as some of you might know, he has expanded this theory with his more recent book, The Anxious Generation, which is that parents in this past, couple of decades have really overparented and overprotected in the real world, but underprotected online, right, in the online world. And so there's, a lot of important takeaways when we think about these concepts. So, parents can be asking themselves, am I giving my kid opportunities to develop self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is that feeling that they get when they go out in the world and they know that they can do something by themselves and that they're successful, right? So it means giving young kids lots of unstructured free play without adult supervision. And it means letting older teens have even more, right? So letting them go on adventures on their own, letting them walk to the market on their own, letting them go into stores and ask for things and return things, all these life skills that actually help them to develop that confidence, that they can make an impact. And that's really, these are essential skills that our kids need to be successful in college and in beyond, right? We want them to take healthy risks. And so if kids, especially teenagers, are acting out, they're being a little more defiant, they're breaking some rules, maybe they're not sticking to curfews, it's very likely that it's their cry for more independence. They have a natural need to satisfy this psychological developmental stage of risk-taking and independence and autonomy. And so if they're not getting it, they're going to seek it out in these ways that parents might find to be concerning. So I always tell parents, if your kids are displaying any of those behaviors, you have to ask yourself, are you giving them opportunities for positive risk, for positive adventures? And if you're not, that's probably why they're seeking it out in some of these other ways that could be unhealthy or dangerous, right? We want to make sure we're giving them those opportunities there. Okay, really important question. What is the biggest predictor of lifelong happiness? Because as parents, all we want is for our kids to be happy, right? Why are we doing everything we're doing? That sending them to wonderful schools, helping them get set up, wanting them to go to quality higher education environments. We're thinking about their lifelong success. Why? We want them to be happy, right? We want them to be happy, functioning adults. So what is the biggest predictor of lifelong happiness? When I talk to parents and I ask them, in big seminars, what do you think? Multiple choice, and we ask questions. Is it the what their GPA was, the number of AP classes they took, the academic rigor in their university? Was it where they graduated in the top of their class or in the middle of their class or the bottom of their class? Is it the amount of capital and resources they have in the bank? And the answer is no to all of those examples. So ask yourself, what do you think is the biggest predictor of lifelong happiness? And the answer is healthy relationships. Healthy relationships. And by the way, while I'm just remembering, if anyone has any questions at all, we're going to take questions at the end. So please feel free to put them in the chat while we're speaking, so you don't forget. And we'll address them at the end of the program. So healthy relationships with the adults in their lives, whether that's at home, at school, and healthy relationships with peers. Biggest predictor. So let's watch a clip of this TED Talk. This is Robert Waldinger. He's the current director of the longest longitudinal study ever conducted out of Harvard. And they have been following the subjects for over 80 years at this point, I believe. And psychologists and researchers, they look at the data in all different ways. But what he looks at here is what are the biggest predictors of this lifelong happiness. So let's see what he has to say.
We put the patient first in that.
And we just got to get through the ads. So I'm just giving us a little mute here. Okay.
At Olive Garden?
No. They tricked me. Okay, here we go.
Turns out that people who are more socially connected to family, to friends, to community are happier, they're physically healthier, and they live longer than people who are less well connected. And the experience of loneliness turns out to be toxic. People who are more isolated than they want to be from others find that they are less happy, their health declines earlier in midlife, their brain functioning declines sooner, and they live shorter lives than people who are not lonely. And the sad fact is that at any given time, more than 1 in 5 Americans will report that they're lonely. And we know that you can be lonely in a crowd and you can be lonely in a marriage. So the second big lesson that we learned is that it's not just the number of friends you have, and it's not whether or not you're in a committed relationship, but it's the quality of your close relationships that matters. It turns out that living in the midst of conflict is really bad for our health. High conflict marriages, for example, without much affection, turn out to be very bad for our health, perhaps worse than getting divorced. And living in the midst of good, warm relationships is protective. Once we had followed our men all the way into their 80s, we wanted to look back at them at midlife and to see if we could predict who was going to grow into a happy, healthy octogenarian and who wasn't. And when we gathered together everything we knew about them at age 50, it wasn't their middle-aged cholesterol levels that predicted how they were going to grow old. It was how satisfied they were in their relationships. The people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. And good, close relationships seem to buffer us from some of the slings and arrows of getting old. Our most happily partnered men and women reported in their 80s that on the days when they had more physical pain, their moods stayed just as happy. But the people who were in unhappy relationships, on the days when they reported more physical pain, it was magnified by more emotional pain.
Okay. So it's really profound, when we're thinking about this, that it's the quality of relationships, right? Not wealth, fame, the hardest work. It's the quality of the relationships that are the greatest predictors. And so close connections with family, friends, and community provide that sense of fulfillment and support for physical and mental health throughout the life. And so when you're thinking about your relationship with your child, with your teen, we really want to be prioritizing the bond. And if you're in constant conflict with your teen, for example, over grades or over their accomplishments or over their time management, as parents, we really have to pause and check with ourselves that whether we've gotten swept up in, what Sherry was referring to of the toxic achievement culture. And it is easy to get swept up. Like I said, I've never met a parent that didn't have the right intention. But sometimes we can get swept up and things start to go wrong. High conflict parent-child relationship is a sign for us that something is off in the balance. And so we have to prioritize the relationships first because we want our kids to not only be experiencing those high quality relationships, but to be learning how to sustain them and maintain them throughout the course of their lives, right? We want to be aware also of what we call grind culture. That constant hard work and dedication are the only paths to success. Often that's at the expense of personal time and well-being. A recent study by Common Sense Media found, that teens are reporting feeling burned out, right? So in this study, 27% say that they are burned out, right? So what is the message that we're sending? Again, referring to this toxic achievement culture. Highly recommend the book Never Enough if you haven't read it. But that children are increasingly absorbing the message, right? That they don't have that worth outside of their accomplishments. Let's watch one other short clip. This is Julie Lithcott-Hames. She's a former dean of freshmen at Stanford. She's going to talk a little bit about parenting. She has such a great perspective from her role in seeing students at the college level, obviously at a very high achieving environment. So let's see what she has to say.
Wouldn't life
Here we go.
spend a lot of time being very concerned about parents who aren't involved enough in the lives of their kids and their education or their upbringing, and rightly so. But at the other end of the spectrum, there's a lot of harm going on there as well, where parents feel a kid can't be successful unless the parent is protecting and preventing at every turn, and hovering over every happening, and micromanaging every moment, and steering their kid towards some small subset of colleges and careers.
We couldn't agree on dinner, so
sorry. All right. Let's give it one more shot.
These kids this way, and I'll say we, because Lord knows in raising my two teenagers, I've had these tendencies myself. Our kids end up leading a kind of checklisted childhood. And here's what the checklisted childhood looks like. We keep them safe and sound and fed and watered. And then we want to be sure they go to the right schools, but not just that they're in the right classes at the right schools, that they get the right grades in the right classes in the right schools, but not just the grades, the scores, and not just the grades and scores, but the accolades and the awards and the sports and the activities and the leadership. We tell our kids, don't just join a club, start a club, because colleges want to see that. And check the box for community service. I mean, show the colleges you care about others. And all of this is done to some hoped for degree of perfection. We expect our kids to perform at a level of perfection we were never asked to perform at ourselves. And so because so much is required, we think, well, then of course we parents have to argue with every teacher and principal and coach and referee and act like our kids' concierge and personal handler and secretary. And then with our kids, our precious kids, we spend so much time nudging, cajoling, hinting, helping, haggling, nagging, as the case may to be sure they're not screwing up, not closing doors, not ruining their future, some hoped for admission to a tiny handful of colleges that deny almost every applicant. And here's what it feels like to be a kid in this checklisted childhood. First of all, there's no time for free play. There's no room in the afternoons because everything has to be enriching, we think. It's as if every piece of homework, every quiz, every activity is a make or break moment for this future we have in mind for them. And we absolve them of helping out around the house. And we even absolve them of getting enough sleep as long as they're checking off the items on their checklist. And in the checklisted childhood, we say we just want them to be happy. But when they come home from school, what we ask about all too often first is their homework and their grades. And they see in our faces that our approval, that our love, that their very worth.
Okay, and where I was going to pause. So what is the message that we're sending? And if you related to anything that she's saying, it's okay. We've all been there. But it's, parenting is an art, and it's all about, figuring out the nuances that work for your family and your kids. And we're all striving to learn and do better every day. And so we want to be thinking about the messages that we're sending. Are we encouraging perfectionism? Or are we talking about healthy striving, right? Perfectionism is damaging. It can cause anxiety, fear of failure, burnout, but healthy striving leads to growth and resilience. That's what we're talking about tonight, right? And so we want to think about what that looks like, and we're going to talk about it. We have to reframe failure as learning. So we need to teach our kids that failure is not the opposite of success, but an important part of it, right? So share your own experiences with failure. We've all failed, right? Say things like, oh, something like that once happened to me, and tell a story about when you failed, or when you didn't get the grade you hoped you were going to get, or when you didn't get the lead in the play, or you didn't get to be the captain of the soccer team, etc., right? And ask them, so, all right, what'd you learn from it? What can we do differently next time? Really, really important that they know that failing will happen. It should happen because it means they're pushing themselves to learn and grow. And this is so important, and a lot of parents miss this. We have to praise the effort, not the results, right? So when we focus on effort, it helps our teens to build that growth mindset. So say things like, instead of saying, great job on that A, say, I'm proud of how hard you worked on that. I know that was really important to you. Or if they get a B, a B minus, a C plus, I know you worked hard on it. Or do you think you worked as hard as you could have? All right. So maybe next time you're going to work harder. You're going to ask for help. But when we talk about effort, we teach our kids how to have a great work ethic and how to care about the quality of their work. If we focus only on outcome, we teach them that their value and self-worth is tied to results. And that is scary. That's really scary, because if I don't get the results that I think everyone wants me to get, then I'm not good enough. Right. And then I'm afraid to face bigger challenges for fear that I won't be able to achieve that grade or that A. So what all kids and teens need from us is not more pressure, but to feel like they matter, that they have intrinsic self-worth, not contingent upon their external achievements. Right. And so if it's been a little while since you've said to your kid, I love you just because you're you, right? Then say that to them tonight, this weekend. Make a little note to give them that important piece of information. So I want to introduce you to this simple framework that we're going to apply actually to some case studies in a few minutes. But I'm going to take you through the acronym first. So it's called Fuel to A+. Okay. And so again, fuel is what parents provide, and the A+ teen is one who can manage their life when you're not there, because that's what we want, right? We're setting them up to leave the home, whether they're going to college or out into the job world and beyond. We want them to be able to manage their life when we're not there. Okay. So in high achieving environments, it's easy to fuel performance, but teens thrive when we fuel them, and we have to figure out what they need. So it's not, we don't need to ask ourselves, are we fueling them enough? Do we have to do more? We have to think about what kind of fuel we're using and how we're preparing them to run on their own. And again, it's going to be different for every kid. So the F stands for fit, for you, for my kid. And we're going to go into these a little more in depth in a moment. Unite is the U. Unite with peers. Okay. E is for emotions and mental health. L is for learning to strive, right? Not perfectionism. And A+ is that autonomy. So what does that mean, fit for you? It means we have to think about our kids' identity and interests and talents, and ask ourselves, is this lifestyle, is this class, is this activity, is this setting at home fueling my child to thrive, or is it fueling someone else's child? Because we can't just stick our kids in a mold that's prescribed, right? And sometimes we, as parents, we can't help but looking at other families and other kids and thinking like, oh, it looks like they're just doing it so right. First of all, I'm sure it's messy at home behind the scenes, but it just doesn't matter. What's really matters is how our kid is thriving and what fit works for our kid. Uniting with peers. Why is it so important? Because as adolescents, if they don't have healthy friendships, they will not be happy. We know that healthy peer relationships is the key to development and mental health. They have to feel like they belong in a community, and they need to have unstructured time with their friends. They need to just hang out with their friends without an activity, without adult supervising. So if your teen doesn't have time every week, at least once a week or twice a week, where they're hanging out with their friends, then encourage them to make that happen. Ask them if they want to do more of that. And most teens will say yes, right? So we can ask ourselves, if we removed grades from school, right, would my child feel successful and valued? Are they experiencing that peer connection? Emotions and mental health. Of course, we need to think about things like sleep, stress management. And we need to ask ourselves this hard question. Would I feel proud if my child were happier, but less impressive on paper? Because they might need to look a little less impressive on paper in order for them to be functioning and thriving. And by the way, that is definitely going to come through to success in college and beyond, right? So hard question that we have to ask ourselves there. And then L is learning to strive. which means some of these things I highlighted, the importance of effort over outcome, the importance that they're going to make mistakes and that that's okay, and that we want to prevent burnout. So are they learning to grow through mistakes? Or are they learning to avoid failure? And if you notice that, then that's a sign that they're focused on being perfect, that they are, kind of falling into that perfectionism trap, and we want to help pull them out of that. And then, of course, the A plus is that autonomy, that amazing autonomy, that self-efficacy, problem solving independently, and that they have confidence in the real world. Can they run their life without me? When they are in high school, every year you should be seeing more independence, more autonomy. My son's a senior now in high school. And I was just talking to my husband about, wow, how independent he has been in these past 6 months, really making a lot of decisions himself, being out in the world more, and how exciting that is, that I am feeling really comfortable that he's going to be ready to leave home. Not that I'm going to be happy about it, but that he's going to be ready to do that and really run his life day to day, without us there. I mean, of course, we're going to be involved in helping them make decisions, but I'm talking about that day to day autonomy in the real world. Okay, so we're going to look at some case studies, and I am going to just pass the slides back over to you, Sherry. We have worked on 3 different case studies that we are going to share. We're going to apply the Fuel to A plus framework. And hopefully many of you in the audience can relate to some of these family situations.
Okay, and I'm just fine. Thank you so much, Lauren. I'm finding this both so thought-provoking and also really resonant, both as a college counselor, as a community member, as a parent, and I'm sure that the parents in our audience are feeling some of those same things. Please, I want to reiterate, we will have time for Q&A at the end. So as questions bubble up, go ahead and just put them right in the Q&A down there at the bottom, usually at the bottom of your little Zoom window, and we'll try to put through as many of them as we can. I am reading you the story, and it's just a few sentences of Priya, and I want folks to try to imagine this experience, and then we'll jump into the questions. So let me describe Priya to you and her situation. Priya is a high-achieving student and community member. She does everything right, takes the most rigorous schedule possible, leads multiple clubs, and overall checks all the right boxes. But it's pretty clear that she's burning out. She's not getting enough sleep. She keeps repeating that she's not doing enough to get into college, and overall, she seems to be working towards perfectionism. It's clear that her drive to be perfect is getting in the way of her overall curiosity and learning. So that's our brief description of Priya. And one of the things I really love about the Rutgers Prep community is the culture of caring that exists, both from the adults to the students, but especially, I think, amongst the students. They really care for each other. They look out for each other. And this perfectionism, it's really interesting to see that kids who will be very generous towards a friend about something that's gone wrong are in the same moment almost so hard on themselves about whatever that little glitch was. And so that's one thing that I think about. And I also think about that we're living in this time period where your self-expression is curated, right? Everybody's putting their very best foot forward in every possible way across multiple platforms, many of us. It's like we used to say, it's like the alumni notes version. For those of you who went to college in the US, you get a magazine from your alma mater, and at the back there are these notes. And nobody ever says, "Oh my gosh, I had the worst year. I applied for 3 jobs. I didn't get any of them. I broke up with my boyfriend." Like that's not the alumni notes section. It's all just the high notes. And so I think the students are living in a culture in which they don't see a lot of. You talked earlier about the importance of understanding that failure is fundamentally a part of learning. But but how do we the water that they're swimming in is definitely leading them down, some of them down into this perfectionist trap, as you called it earlier. So
Yes, exactly.
help us think about this.
Yeah, so in this case, I feel really concerned about Priya, that she clearly is taking on a perfectionism mindset, and her parents um, are very likely playing a role, right? And so, you mentioned that she's clearly burning out. So, in this case, I'm imagining that in, this character, that it's obvious she's tired, right? That her teachers and friends, counselors are probably noticing that she's burning out, but that she's pushing herself and pushing herself and pushing herself. The thing that really concerns me about kids like this is that they're actually losing themselves. They're losing their creativity, their curiosity for the world. Often they lose a love of learning. And so by the time they get to college, even if they got themselves into one of these elite schools, they don't have that intrinsic motivation, because they've kind of lost the inspiration, right? So in a case like this, it's really critical that parents step in, that they give the right message, that this isn't working, this isn't okay, that you have to get the right rest. That sleep is so important. Okay, one night that you stayed up really late, we got to, make sure that there's not a habitual pattern of lack of sleep, which we know deteriorates mental health. And reconnecting to things she loves. So I'm thinking that, with a student like this, that I would want, counselors and parents to say, what about, I like to call it like a curiosity reboot or a creativity reboot. Like, what about you just pause, right? And I want you to find one hobby or activity that you really love, that is not going to be graded, that there'll be no performance, that you're not going to post on your Instagram account, but that you're truly doing it for yourself. And I think it can be really helpful to see what happens, in those cases when we kind of prescribe that curiosity reboot. So I think that would be important for a student like this. And also, that bedtime. So working, with the parents and this student to say, you have to pick, let's say, at least 2 nights a week, right? Where there is a clear boundary, and that you're getting that good night's sleep, that is critical. And I think, the other action step when it comes to the parents' mindset, is really checking themselves, because I imagine that there's been a lot of praise around achievement in this family, and understandably so. It's exciting when our kids are achieving. But that the parents would need to really ask themselves some of those hard questions. Like, if Priya looks a little less impressive on her college application, but is clearly thriving, in terms of her mental well-being, am I going to be okay with that? And I need to be okay with that, right? So how do I adjust my own expectations as a parent so that I'm really fueling my child for health, and that autonomy? So, those are my thoughts. Please, if any of you want to interject any more, Rochelle, please do.
No, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move into the second case study here.
Okay, great.
So this is John, and John's situation is a little bit different. So I'll read this out for everyone, and then we can talk about reflections and takeaways.
Yeah.
So John struggles to complete work on time. He procrastinates and has trouble seeing how his lack of time management and work ethic is negatively impacting his school life. Recently, he has indicated a strong interest in entrepreneurship. John is well loved by his school community, has many friends, and it is clear that he has a high EQ. There is a family concern that he has some B's and C's on his and B's and a C on his transcript, and that his involvement in school and social life is getting in the way of academic success.
And there are a few questions there on the slide, but just thinking about this situation from a counselor's standpoint, I think the first thing is that with our own children, and this can go for counselors, but really in your own parent-child relationship, I don't think that we stop often enough to provide specific, pointed, sincere praise on what our children are doing really well. And I know that we see those natural strengths. Maybe we see them really thriving socially or that they have this high EQ, but those aren't the things in this achievement culture that we tend to praise for whatever reason. So just kind of taking a step back as a counselor or as a parent and saying that and calling that out for John just to let him know what's really going well. I think we have a natural human instinct to hone in on what could be better and to see some of those imperfections, especially when they show up as letter grades on a transcript, because we instinctively worry about our child's future and their ability to be successful adults. But I think it's also important to remember that success as an adult and happiness as an adult has a lot to do with relationships and this strength in social life and beyond the classroom. So, the other thing I wanted to say is that we make the mistake of thinking that we're the only parent who has John as our child. So our child's the only one who's deficient in these particular areas, when in reality, it's pretty common. I think a lot of students, especially in this generation, there's a lot competing for young people's attention. And I think acknowledging to our children that that's the case. You know, it's difficult to stay on top of everything that we're expected to be responsible for, and it can be really difficult to prioritize. So what I would think about here is that this interest in entrepreneurship that John has is kind of exciting because it provides a different axis or avenue through which to view success as something that might be skills based and thinking about muscles that you can work and grow toward adulthood versus getting A's. So I think asking John or your child really open-ended questions about what makes them feel energized and like they're on top of everything that's coming their way, without prescribing the specific system that works for you as an adult. We've had a lot of practice with our systems that work for us, and we're pretty set in our ways, but they're still figuring out, do they like a calendar? Do they like a check-in every week? Or what is it that really is going to help them thrive? And then how do they connect the dots between this interest in entrepreneurship and potential greater academic success? So thinking about, what does it mean to try a new idea? What are the skills that an entrepreneur would actually need? Are there things that you can test and learn and try out? And I think overall, just broadening the definition of success and parenting the child you have and noticing and calling out their strengths is kind of where my instincts would lie. But I would love to hear your thoughts, Lauren.
Terrific. Yeah, I love everything that you're saying. When we think about the fuel to A plus framework, I'm really thinking about the F for fit. So, right, John clearly has strong people skills. He's interested in entrepreneurship, and he has some B's and a C on his transcript. But for him, what his parents can be thinking about is, how do I fuel those skills that he clearly has? He has people skills, and as you said, people skills are going to be more and more important in our world of AI and automation. It's the people skills that are key to being successful in managing people and managing systems, et cetera. So I would be really thinking about how to fuel his skills and his natural talents, right? So what comes easy to him? What is he good at? Focus on that. We don't have to push him so hard to do the things that he struggles with. Yes, we also at the same time want to teach him how to time manage. Maybe he has some poor follow through. So we're going to think about, how to hold him accountable for things. So if he's really social, then we could also use those peer connections and uniting him with those peers, but as accountability. So you can hang out with your friends after I know you accomplish the things that have to be done, whether it's chores at home or schoolwork assignments that have to be done. So, that's really how I'm thinking about it, right in line with some of the things that you were sharing. And in terms of little action steps, with a kid like John, he might be very overwhelmed with a complex system of organization. It might need to be really simple. Like, what's the one top priority thing you need to get done? Just the one. Let's figure that out and work on that, right? As opposed to, let's create a binder and folders and to-do lists. Sometimes it's just like, can you identify the one priority? And let's make that piece happen. When I think about a kid like John, he is right on that track for autonomy. That piece is probably very desirable for him. And so the parents just need to figure out how to support him to get him there, and they need to be okay that on the transcript we might not see that the perfect A's, and as you mentioned before, when we are providing our students with feedback, in the form of a transcript, it can be really hard for them to see their other skills and talents as important. And so it's really the parents' role to remind them the grades are one way that we assess your performance in school and in life, but here are other ways. I'm assessing by how, these great friendships you have. I'm assessing by your motivation to start your own small business, and let's work on that. So, I think that's an important piece for this type of student as well.
Okay, and I have the last student.
Great.
His name is Chris. So Chris is extremely bright and aspires to be in the highest math course possible. Based on last year's performance, overall test scores, and recommendation from his previous teacher, it's clear that Chris would benefit from the honors level course rather than the AP course. Chris participates in class, is intelligent, and grasps the material, but his teacher has shared that Chris benefits from a slower pace to absorb and fully understand the content. Chris has mentioned he will quote unquote just get a tutor when in the higher level class. However, with his extracurricular activities and Eagle Scout project, Chris is very busy. So I have to say, this is something that we as counselors run across a lot with students.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that checking boxes. Well, I have to get to this level math class for me to get into this college. It's something we deal with a lot. And we're actually hearing from the college side that students are, in math especially, are not prepared. That they really need to dig deeper into the subject matter in high school and get a full-on grasp of the material in order to find success in college. This past year, I went to our national conference and I attended a session about calculus that was actually a continuation of a study that was being done and had been presented the year before. And they had college professors there saying that they really wish, if a kid gets to calc, that's fabulous, but they really need to get to know the subject matter before they get to college, as opposed to just checking that box off. Yes, I took that math class, and now I can move on. That the material itself is much more important. I personally, as a counselor in this type of situation, will say to a student, especially if it's a high achieving student, look, I am sure you are capable of doing all of this work. However, there's only 24 hours in the day. So, do you have enough time to actually get it all done? And I would rather a student move into a class that they are capable of managing the material with everything else that they want to do. Because clearly, if they're doing an Eagle Scout project, that's equally as important as school. There's other things going on. So, just getting a tutor doesn't usually cut it to the point that they're going to know the material well enough once they get beyond high school. So it's an important conversation that we have to have fairly regularly with students, especially when we get to the point of course selection, which is coming up soon, right? So, yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, that's all great to hear. And as I'm thinking about Chris, I'm also thinking about my son because, and I'll share that last year when he was a junior and he was picking out his coursework, he was getting swept up into the achievement culture. And he started listing like 3, 4, 5 AP classes. And I really, have been really thoughtful about these concepts that we're talking about, read a lot of these books. I've talked to Sherry about this many times, and I said I really don't think that that is the right approach for you. And we really persuaded him to bring it down to 3 AP classes, and only one of them being incredibly challenging and the other ones being ones that we knew he can handle, because I was thinking about how I'm fueling him. And I was really thinking about the E, his emotional and mental well-being. Is he going to be able to sleep? Is he going to be overly stressed? And I know my kid, and I know, what was going to help him to have the right balance and to thrive. And it's worked out really well. We're in January, and he's had some, late hard nights, but it's been a very healthy balance from my perspective as a parent. So when I'm thinking about this, of course, we're thinking about F, fit. Like, we have to really ask ourselves, what's the right match for our kid in this situation? And it's also, it's that L, learning to strive in a healthy way, that you need to learn to strive to learn the math itself. Because let's think about what happens, like you just said, when you get to college. You want to be set up for success when you're there, so that you can have that foundation that you need in order to thrive. And so that, breaking free of that, I have to, be perfect on paper, that I have to achieve everything I can on paper, and really helping our kids to have, to hear a different message, which is that we want you to thrive. And it is okay if you're not doing what is prescribed as the highest level, even if other kids around you are doing that. And that takes a lot of maturity, and so I think we're also teaching them how to have that independent thinking, that A+ thinking, that they can be asking themselves, what's best for my long-term growth and development here, academically, emotionally. And so if we can ask ourselves and our kids, when we look back at the end of this year, what are we going to thank ourselves for, right? Let's try to be real with we are going to be happy that we chose to do differently, because we know it's what fuels our kids. We know it's what's best for them. And these are the hard questions that we have to ask ourselves as parents, that, it sometimes does feel like it's going against the grain of what other people are doing. But I can tell you that from my own experience and from working with so many other parents, that it is the most wonderful feeling when you've made a decision that is right for your child, and it works, and they're successful in that situation, and that you prioritized their well-being over how they look on paper. So I hope we can all keep doing that.
Thank you so much. All right, folks, now's your chance. Type away in the Q&A or in the chat. We'll look at both spots, and let us know if there's something that you were hoping that we'd address that we haven't addressed, or something that you heard that sparked a question. We did have a couple of folks send questions in advance of the program, because we offered that opportunity during the registration period. So I can start off by sharing one of those questions while maybe folks are typing, which is, and I really like this question: how can parents best support high school seniors through the stress and uncertainty of the college process without increasing anxiety or pressure? I love that question.
I know. It's a great question, and I'll share my thoughts, and then please also all of you chime in. I think it really comes down to the message that we give our kids as parents, that we need to be giving them the message that whatever happens, you're going to have a great experience, that we're going to support you through this journey, and that no matter where you land, that you're going to have incredible opportunities, and we are thrilled, and I think that is key. If we give the message that we really, really want them to get into these 3 schools, and that's what we're working so hard for, they're going to internalize it, right? There's no way that they're not. So if you want to talk privately with, your spouse, your co-parent, and be like, oh, wouldn't it be so great if they went there? That's where we went, or isn't that exciting? Okay, but that's fine. Keep it to yourselves. But the message that you give your kids really needs to be, no matter what, you're great. It's going to be okay.
Thanks so much. Okay, folks, last chance to get your questions in. It may be that you don't have any, and that's okay too. No pressure. Do any of our other panelists have things that kind of bubbled up for them that you want to say as we get ready to send people back into their evenings?
Oh, I mean, I'll just chime in that, Lauren, the framework you gave us tonight, I think is going to be really helpful and productive for our conversations with parents and with students and parents' conversations, because we want to partner with families and students to make sure we're helping support towards those students' goals and what they're working towards and what they're hoping for. And certainly, we want them to enjoy their senior year as well. It's such an exciting time to be with their friends and have this last year of high school. And when they're all tied up in constant knots, obviously there's going to be times of uncertainty, but when they're in constant knots and worry, it takes away from their experience as well. So I think it's vital to think from that perspective too.
We are really grateful to the parents of the Rutgers Prep community for your partnership in this process, for your trust. And we hope that you have found these insights as helpful as we have found them, as we continue to support these amazing young people in this
Ms. Krause,
very.
there is one question
Oh,
in the
good.
Q&A I just found.
Yay.
So if you don't
Do
mind,
that.
okay.
Go for it.
So how can parents balance in a way that we're telling our child, our students to strive, but then they think we're asking them for perfection?
Mhm.
What are ways I can phrase it so we're encouraging effort, we're encouraging them to work hard, we're encouraging
Mhm.
that work ethic, and yet we want to be sure they're not thinking in their mind that we're asking for perfectionism.
Great question. And within that question, there's part of the answer, which is the effort, right? So be focused on the effort. So, pointing out that you're noticing they're working harder, or asking them, do you feel like you're putting in your best effort? These are questions we could be asking. That piece is really important. But the other thing that I'll say is that very often as parents, we could probably be asking them less questions about their academics, especially as they're advancing through high school. They really should be managing it on their own. And we need to give them space to go through a process of, maybe they did procrastinate. Maybe they were a little lazy. Then they experienced what happened. Now they decided they're going to work harder. Then maybe they had to stay up late. They didn't get as good of a grade. Now, next time they're going to try it differently. But if we're there every day asking them and kind of managing it a little bit and reminding them, then they don't get to have that critical process where they actually learn the skills of time management and struggle with the disappointments that they might have set themselves up for, and then get through it and do it differently. So honestly, most of us probably need to back off a little bit and just not ask as many questions about academics and not talk about striving as much. And if you have, freshman or sophomore, that's great, because you can actually say to yourself, I'm not really going to ask that much this marking period. I'm just going to watch and see what happens, and then have conversations with them about it. How did it go? This and that. I mean, even recently, I was talking to my husband and I was saying, man, he's staying up late tonight, this and that. And then, we were saying, But the reality is he's figuring it all out. He's doing a really good job, and so I can't micromanage this one, even though, caring, involved parent in me was like, should I be giving him feedback about this? And so I really catch myself all the time. And so, it makes our jobs easier, and we actually do our jobs better when we take a step back and give them more space to have all those experiences they need to, which will include failures. We got to watch them fail and let them fail and not bulldoze it out of the way. Otherwise, they won't develop those skills that they actually need to develop to be successful in life. And so I actually just want to wrap up with a couple of takeaway questions, which is to remind everyone that the goal is not that perfect performance. It's the teen who is autonomous and can run their own lives, right? That's really the key. So ask yourselves when you're in these different situations, is the way that I'm fueling my child right now about helping them to seem successful in this moment, or is it about helping them to become independent later? Right? Because then maybe I'll back up and let them fail a little bit. And am I nurturing a healthy parent-child relationship to last a lifetime? Because that is what we truly want. And so it's fine if you have conflict, because we need to have those ruptures in order to have repair, which means we apologize, we talk about it, we work through it, right? But we want to prioritize that healthy relationship, which goes back to us saying, I'm here for you. We're going to get through all of this together. And no matter where you end up, you're going to be great. It's going to be okay. So I hope that was
we got another question, though,
One last question.
Lauren.
Yeah, of course.
Can you provide tips for fostering independence in a child who struggles with self-motivation and frequently asks for help to get started? Also with confidence in their ability to be academically successful. This same student is very social. So I guess this idea of building that independence in a child who's struggling to motivate themselves and struggling with confidence in their academic life.
Great. So I would start outside of academics, and I would focus on independence in the real world. So getting them doing more things, like even making dinner for the family, going to the grocery store together and telling, her to go pick out all the fruits and vegetables that we're going to need for the week, or, bringing a list of ingredients for a recipe, that she wants to make. Those are just some examples off the top of my head. Or, ride your bike to your friend's house, walk to the store together. Independence in the real world will lead to more confidence in all areas of life. And so I would start outside of academics and then, see how that trickles in and impacts academics. You might also rely on teaming up with teachers and your counselors to figure out how to set up this child for success in the classroom and at school. Maybe there are leadership opportunities, as little as helping another student in class who might not understand something that this child understands, all the way up to, being a part of, leadership roles in the community. But it's a great question. And I think sometimes parents focus too much first on the academic confidence. And it usually doesn't happen that way. It usually happens from, confidence in the real world. And then it'll trickle back in.
So great.
Lauren, thank you so much for your time, your energy, your amazing tips and hints. And we just so appreciate the partnership. And yes, and thank you, families, for joining us. Have a great evening, and we'll be sending some resources to you moving forward. Thank you
so much. It was great to be here. My pleasure. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.